Today on the show, we are talking about enhancing communication with high school athletics and really bridging the gap between all the different communication angles that we have between parents and coaches, coaches and parents, support staff and parents, and all the different things, with the goal of really understanding how to communicate in these settings, the most appropriate way to communicate, what to say and maybe what not to say. And on the show today, I have athletic performance coach, aka strength coach. I'm going to let her tell you the difference. Shelby Reichel with me, who has worked in this setting and does a lot to help educate coaches and other strength coaches and people in the industry about communication. So, Shelby, thanks so much for being on the show today. I'll let you introduce yourself and give everyone a little bit about your background.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Amy. I really appreciate it. Excited to talk about athletic communications in high school athletics. So, yes, I am an athletic performance coach, and I use that term to kind of distinguish from strength and conditioning only because I think that strength and conditioning is an older term. I think it kind of conjures up those images of, the old dirty weight rooms and the bodybuilding and the powerlifting and all of that. And I think athletic performance kind of reflects the fact that we know and have learned so very much about athletic performance and how to help the body perform at the highest level possible. And so I think that that term kind of reflects that. I work for the Ohio State Wexner Medical Center, and I am contracted to two different schools. One of them is a small private K through 12 school where I work with all of our athletes in grades 6 through 12. And then I'm also contracted to a local D3 university where I work with a few of their teams as well. Um, a little bit about my background and where I'm coming from, because when we talk about communication in high school athletics, there are so many different forms of high schools, right? There's small private and large public and everything in between. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that there are going to be a lot of differences in how things can and should be done in those settings. And I understand that not everything I say in my perspective will be able to just be able to be applied in a blanket manner over
Sure.
across all of those different types of schools. But I did attend and play sports for a large public school, and then I coached volleyball at that large public school, my alma mater. Very thankful to my high school volleyball coach for that. I was able to coach there for several years. I ended up teaching there for a few years and doing some strength stuff there. And I've also been in two different small private schools. So I have kind of run the gamut in terms of different schools, but most of what I'll be speaking to today will be from that smaller private school perspective. And I think I'll at least be able to acknowledge when something that I'm saying may not work for one of those other
Sure.
settings. Um, and the last thing I want to say before we start is that while I am very grateful to work for the Ohio State Wexner Medical Center, what I talk about today are my own opinions.
Yeah.
They're not meant to be representative of the Wexner Medical Center or any of my schools for that matter. It's just my personal experience that I'm speaking from today.
Yeah, I love it. And you got some, girl, and you work in high school sports of any kind. I've been there for almost 19 years myself. And it's interesting. And, kind of what we were talking about before we started, communication has really evolved. And now we have so much more access to communicate with each other. Like I was telling you, when I was in high school, my sister was a really elite volleyball player. My parents couldn't talk to the coach. There was no way we didn't email, text. You had to pick up the phone and actually call somebody's office. I mean, we had cell phones, but and so now the opportunities are just so much more advanced, which is good and possibly bad at the same time. So let's start by kind of talking, generally speaking, in communication across the board in high school athletics. How important do you think communication is? And what are some of the biggest challenges that you see on a regular basis?
Yeah, so communication in high school athletics is crucial because there are so many different parties involved. You have athletic directors, athletic trainers, strength coaches, and then you have the sport coaches. You have athletes, you have officials, and even and parents, and of
Hmm.
course your players, your athletes. There are so many different parties, and there's this very unique coming together of people who are full time and live in the high school sports world, live in the school world with kids, and then you have professionals by day who are coming in and yes, getting paid, but not a whole lot. They're doing it because they love it. And so you have those part-time people, officials, same thing, right? So I think it's just this really unique conglomeration of people. And because a lot of our coaches or some of our coaches are living in a different world, right? They're living in the banking world or the medical world or whatever it is before
Yeah.
they even show up to practice in the afternoon. They've just come from a completely different place, not only physically, but in their mind. Communication really is really crucial to like being the glue to hold all of that together. Um, and I think the challenges that I see the most often are from or as a result of uh, a lack of closing the communication loop, right? Something that we always want to do, like over communication is probably better, but
Right.
it is from the coaches who are off campus, who live in that different world. And I say that not meaning to attack those coaches. We have amazing people who are busting their butt to go to work and then driving as fast as they can to a school to serve their athletes.
Hmm.
And we need those people doing it, but living in a different world for the majority of your day and then coming over to the high school setting, it does make things more difficult.
Yeah, it's so interesting you mentioned that. So I live in Texas. High school sports are pretty much like a cult here, let's call it. You have head football coaches that they don't even have to teach. I mean, their goal, I mean, that's
Yeah.
all they do is coach. And then I was in North Dakota this summer speaking at a national high school athletic coaches event, and it was tied with like the North Dakota coaches like state event or whatever. Okay, up there, the pretty much in North Dakota, I learned that all the coaches are just volunteers. They
Wow.
go to work all day and they just volunteer and coach.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what are the words coming out of your mouth? So, to your point, when your whole job in life revolves around that versus this is like your after work hobby, it's very different. And obviously, we're all trained in different forms. My background, I have a degree in communications. So, it's really important to me. I always think about how I'm communicating. Obviously, not everyone has that experience or is paying as close of attention to it. So what I want us to do is talk about some different groups of communication. So, and we'll preface which group we're talking about so that it's clear to everyone listening. So first, let's start talking about parent and athlete communication with their team sport coaches, their football coach, their volleyball coach, their wrestling coach, whoever it is. So, how would you say that parents and athletes can effectively communicate with their sport coach about concerns they have, or, just generally speaking, whatever's going on with their team, with their sport?
Yeah. So I would say that even though we're talking about parents and athletes communicating with coaches, I think it's really important for the coach to first create an environment. I think the coach has the responsibility to create an environment where they are offering communication first.
Yeah.
As backward as that may sound, like open the line of communication, have a meeting, show your face, say who you are, what you're about, what your expectations are for the program. And I think communication that follows after that, and I know we'll talk about that, but communication that follows after that becomes easier. One of the things that I think is most important and that I see uh, be successful with my coworkers and colleagues is that they ask and encourage the athlete to come talk to them first, right?
Yeah.
And I know that that's really difficult. And I am not a parent, full disclosure, so I don't know what it's
Me
like to have
either.
yeah. So I can't imagine what it's like to have your kid in a tough situation, and I'm sure you want to advocate for them, you love
Yeah.
them, you care about them, um, but the athlete talking to the coach first uh, helps the athlete develop that independence
Yeah.
and those life skills that we want them to have to be able to advocate for themselves, stand up for themselves, take
Mhm.
ownership of their sporting experience, which helps them later on in life. And That's the reason we're in high school athletics, right? As
Right.
important as it is in Texas, those football players are still going to go on, and a lot of them are
Yeah.
never going to play professional sports, right? Like,
Right.
we're here to serve the kids. We're here to help them grow into the people that we want them to be. And so, one of the ways to do that is these life lessons. And so, asking your athletes to come talk to you in person, not with a 10 p.m. text,
Yeah.
right? To
Right.
your point about all these different methods of
Oh my
communication that are
gosh.
available, not with not even with an email, unless you're asking to set up a meeting. I think
Right.
that face-to-face communication and conversations are extremely important, and they're the most beneficial way to communicate. And so, yeah, athlete first, and then if parents need to get involved, and I know there are a lot of coaches out there who will feel differently about this, but
Yeah.
the coaches that we have had that have been most successful in managing all of these interactions still ask the athlete to be present when they're talking with the parent.
Yeah.
And I
Totally.
think that's huge. Like, the athlete comes and talks to you, the situation's not resolved. The athlete doesn't then leave the scene, right? Like, the athlete and the coach and the parent then all need to come together to
Right.
make sure that we are all on the same page, and that the communication between the athlete and the parent at home is matching what coach
Right.
is saying to athlete and what coach is saying to parent. And so I think closing that communication loop, like we've mentioned, is really important. And the more you can do that face to face, which I understand is difficult,
Yeah.
the better.
Yeah. I've worked with so many, whether it's like high schools or talked at like booster clubs or parent groups. And, a lot of coaches, especially in the high school space, in the like club high school space as well, they'll have a beginning of the season meeting. And I think it's great what you said. We'll talk a little more about team sport, communications with parents, but allowing those team sport coaches to have a meeting where they can lay some groundwork. Cause I find a lot of the trouble with communication is the expectations weren't laid out and what's appropriate and what's allowed. And that often is what leads to miscommunication, mistakes in communication. So, where there is a very strong foundation of like, these are the things that you can ask, this is how I want to be communicated with. And these are the things that while we appreciate you have concern about them, please don't talk to us about how to coach your athlete or whatever that is seems to be like at least there's groundwork laid. And then if you're having meetings, you can reference back to those expectations that were set. What would you say, just even watching from afar, some of the biggest mistakes are, I could start to list them, that parents probably have and or athletes have when they're trying to communicate with a sport coach?
Yeah, I think we all probably know what those are, right? Like, the first and foremost being
Uh,
communicating in the heat of the moment when
yes,
you're still
passion.
very upset. Yeah.
Yeah,
And communicating out of emotion
yeah.
instead of stepping back to think about the situation rationally. And so I'm sure a lot of
Hmm.
people have heard of the 24-hour rule, right? Like, if
Yep.
you're upset and you want to contact me about something, then you need to wait 24 hours. And the even bigger buffer to that is, if you want to communicate with me, your kid has to communicate with me first, and you have to wait 24 hours. Um, yeah, and then I think the other thing is, um, again, it's all the things we should do and we know we
Yeah.
should do. We don't necessarily do them. Like, the tone of an email. Like, I still don't think at any point it should be a text or a phone call.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe there are exceptions to that, but to me, a coach should be respected as a professional. And
Hmm.
maybe I'm a little old school despite my age, I guess. I still think that a professional form of communication is via email or in person. You're automatically offering that respect to not step into
Yeah.
that person's personal space by texting or calling
Yes.
them unless it's been prearranged or
Yes.
pre-approved, or that's what the coach prefers. There are some that prefer that, and that's fine.
Hmm.
And then so email to me, it just always connotes more respect. And then lastly, I would say um, that parents and anyone communicating in a difficult situation, this can apply to anything. I think we're much better off asking questions first so that we can seek to understand,
Hmm.
instead of making statements first. And
Yeah.
that's obviously really difficult to do. Um, but I think we'll get where we want to be a lot faster if we're asking questions and
Yeah.
seeking to understand. Um, yeah, so those are kind of my first three things that I think of.
Yeah. I love that. And with an email too, like I just, in my own world of communication, sometimes like to lay things out. Like these are the things, these are my concerns. And then you give that person a chance to be able to read it and process it versus it like coming at them like this. Because if a coach doesn't see something coming and they have no idea that the parent is mad, that can be a lot and they're not prepared to respond. And that often heats things up, as you mentioned. And so I feel like if a parent can email to set up a meeting or whatever that is, or email, it gives the coach a little bit to even understand the concern before they get to the communication experience, which I think it is really important. So let's now reverse this. We've already kind of been talking about it, but let's talk about team sport coach communications with parents and athletes. Like, and what are some of the best strategies? I mentioned that I've seen it, whether it's effective or not, I don't know, but I definitely think those team meetings where the coach up front, this is the way we communicate, this is the way things should be handled, and are very transparent because, like anything with the kid, if you've been told once, then you can reference back. Remember that this is how we do things at this school, this club, whatever it is. So I would love to just hear, like, from a coach perspective, because I know you work with a lot of them, what you've seen and or what you think are those best strategies.
Yeah, so I do also communicate with parents. I think the biggest difference and what makes my communication with parents a heck of a lot easier is that there's no playing time involved for me,
Yeah. Hmm.
which is nice. But in the parent communication that I see, my coaches conduct, the people I work with conduct, the ones that are most successful do exactly what you just said. They have that preseason meeting, and they don't just have it, it's extremely organized, right?
Yes.
And we aren't just saying verbally the expectations and how we want things done, but there's an accompaniment of something in print that is
I
then
was about to
provided
say,
to the
sign it
parent.
off. Check, check,
Yeah,
check.
like and I don't think any of our coaches require signatures or anything like that, but it is provided to the parents in a
Mhm.
concrete format, a
Yeah.
PowerPoint or a document or whatever it is, and making that more permanent in players' minds and in parents' minds, I think
Mhm.
kind of seals, you know, that process. My process for communication is that we won't talk about X, Y, and Z, and that if you want to talk about A, B, and C, your kid comes to me first, and then you do. And
Yeah.
it's like you said, it gives you not just a conversation that you can reference, but it gives you a concrete thing that you can
Yeah.
reference that you have supplied to the parent, and then we can't just have that meeting no matter how great it is and that be the last thing that the parents
Right.
and the athletes hear from the coach, right? And so my husband is actually a coach at a large public
Ah,
school. Crazy,
okay.
right? So I get a lot of the
Yes,
inside.
you hear a lot about the
Yeah,
communications
yeah.
going on.
So him at a large public school, as well as the
Yeah.
people I work with at a small private school, hands down, the number one thing I can say that makes it helpful, more successful, you get less parent emails, is send a weekly email.
Just give
And
the updates. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, it takes my husband on Sundays an hour to draft that when he's in
Yeah.
season, right? But
Yeah.
that hour is going to save him
Yeah.
hours on the back end, because not only has he clearly laid out the schedule for the week, he can, and my football coach and basketball coaches at my school are
Hmm.
amazing at this. They send reminders about uniforms, and
Yep.
we expect that your uniforms are clean. We expect that you did your own laundry at home to make sure your uniforms are clean. Like
Yes.
it's a continuation of that first conversation that um,
Hmm.
defines and outlines those expectations and the culture that they want to create. And I think when you do that and you're sending it to the parents and the athletes, and that first message that you gave is continually reinforced, and the parents feel like they're informed and a part of things and a part
Yeah.
of the experience, like it just changes everything for the better. And so, I've seen,
Yeah.
I've mentioned the best coaches I know do that, but I've also seen plenty who don't want to put the time into that, or they have another job that's so demanding with kids and it's really difficult, but it really does make things all the more difficult in
Yeah.
every other sense.
Well, and now too, there's so many communication apps that I mean, I know like in public school, like a lot of them, you really can't even text a coach anymore. A coach can't text the player, So like we
Yeah.
have a sports nutrition group on Sports U. And so,
Yes.
to me, it looks like a good old Facebook group, basically, is what it looks like.
Yeah.
But the beauty is, too, you can schedule out post. And so for a coach, while it might take a little bit of time on the front, a little bit of time on the front end can save you a lot on the back end, of whether you have your schedule set for that week or some certain reminders that you always want to go out before 24 hours before a game or whatever that is. And then one of the expectations is that parents and athletes know they have to check Sports You or whatever app. There's tons of them out there, but reminder or whatever it is that so they know what that is. So I agree so much. I think it really is like laying down the expectations, because if you haven't laid down expectations, no one knows what to follow or what to expect. And so that can be huge. I love that he does the email. I know a little bit. I've worked with the one football coach here, very large 6A school in Texas, and he's very communicative like that. And it's very helpful. Everyone knows what to expect, and they're not surprised when certain things come certain ways because they were told exactly like how it was going to go. What about like, unfortunately, there will be scenarios where team sport coaches get into whether it's like a very high pressure type of a conversation or a difficult conversation, could be about an athlete's playing time and different things that parents probably even shouldn't be involved in. What are some of your recommendations based on what you've seen now that we know your husband is a coach? Great, about how the best ways are to handle some of those difficult conversations. You've mentioned some already, but dialing in on specifically handling difficult conversations with parents and athletes.
Yeah, so I think of two things first, and one that I meant to mention previously. In a high school setting, I think it's really important for all coaches to have the support of their athletic director or directors, right? So when we're talking about setting up that meeting and setting guidelines and expectations and putting those in front of parents and providing them with a hard copy, I think it's first important to make sure that what you're putting in that aligns completely and totally with what your athletic directors, or even potentially in our case a head of school, or in someone else's case
Mhm.
a principal, like let's make sure that we are aligning all of our values and expectations
Yeah.
so that if we get to one of these tough conversations, and it ends up needing it, the parent athlete coach trio is not able to resolve it, and we know that it needs to go to an athletic director next. We know that what the coach has been saying, the message they've been sending, the expectations they have set are going to be upheld, reinforced, supported
Yeah,
by the
supported.
athletic director, right? So
Hmm.
collaborating with your athletic directors first and ensuring that, we're on the same page so that if situations arise, like you can back me up without feeling like you're backed into a corner,
Right.
is really important. And so, I mean, we hope to resolve things before they go to athletic directors, but sometimes that happens. Sometimes that's a necessary solution.
Hmm.
In terms of like a heated conversation, I think that to your point earlier, if it's a surprise conversation, like if it was unplanned, and in some cases a coach knows a parent is disgruntled, and in some
Right.
cases the coach may have no idea that mom or dad has been simmering at home.
Yeah, it's been like
They think everything's
brewing for, yeah,
fine.
like,
Yeah. So I think if it's
oh
a
gosh.
surprise conversation, the coach always 100% of the time has the option to say, I will have a conversation with you, but not right now, not
Right.
here, not this way. And I don't just think they have the option. I strongly recommend that they take that
Yeah.
option and make that choice to say, let's do it later. Like, I would like to have this conversation in a different manner, but I also want to think through your concerns. I,
Hmm.
did or didn't know that you were this upset, and I care about your child, your athlete,
Yeah.
and I would like to think through these things before I speak with you.
Yeah.
So if it's a surprise conversation, I strongly recommend that it doesn't continue, that you have to say, I hear you, I'm so sorry you're upset, um and I'm not, uh what's the word, not blowing this off, right?
Yeah. Overlooking it
Yeah,
or
I'm
whatever.
not
Yeah.
overlooking it, I'm not dismissing it,
There you
but
go.
in order for us to handle this the best way possible, this conversation needs to happen later. Like,
Yep.
um if it is a planned conversation that still ends up getting heated. I mean, hopefully that's the parent, not the coach, right? Like
Yeah.
we always hope that we're the ones that can stay calm in those situations.
Yeah.
I have a coach that I work with. I would consider him a mentor. He's more experienced than I am, and I go to him, when I get that email that makes me like get
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
upset and defensive, right? And he's so good at it, but he always tells me whether it's in person or via email, and especially in person, the more upset that parent gets, the more he tries to do the opposite. He's like,
Yeah.
my demeanor will
Totally.
change, my body language will change, my voice will change, I'll slow down,
Hmm.
I'll calm down. Um, and I think that's a great way to
Yeah.
de-escalate things, right? Is to
Yeah.
reflect what you want to see out of the conversation instead of matching it.
Hmm.
And then I think in that moment, and I've done this with parents before too, let them spend it. Let them
Yeah.
say
Hopefully when they
everything they need to
say, yeah.
say, however they need to say it to get it out and be done
Hmm.
with it. And you
Yeah.
just sit and you listen, even though it hurts and it's frustrating,
Yeah.
until they can take that deep breath after the fact, and then you can
They
give
got
it
it
a
out.
minute and
Yeah.
like try to resume that conversation, right?
Mhm.
So I think again that's something that applies probably to communication in all forms with all people, but
Yeah.
especially in this kind of situation.
You said something a second ago. You didn't call it what I'm going to call it, but it was so helpful. Is one of the things like I do a lot of just coaching of dietitians and dietetic interns in the world of communications because it's kind of my background, and is I messages. So in a heated conversation, if I say, well, Shelby, I mean, you automatically put someone on a defense. If, on the other hand, I'm a coach and I say, well, I understand how you're feeling, or I hear what you're saying. Like, even that right there, while it doesn't, even if it is the polar opposite and you don't agree with it, like it's respectful and it will at least usually help bring down
Yes.
the knowledge. I mean, like I'm a dietitian. Guess what? Everyone's got an opinion about everything because everybody eats. And I'm like,
What?
and I'm like, what? Just because you eat doesn't make you an expert in food. Let me give you a little quick rundown. Just because I drive a car does not mean I'm an expert in like building cars. And so, no, people are so passionate about it. And so, that's one of the things I'll teach dietitians is saying, I understand where you're coming from. Tell me a little more about why you feel like that, or so, open those open doors of conversations, but those I messages,
Yes.
because the second you say you, someone
Yeah.
goes on the defense, whether it's a parent, a coach, anyone, because we all have our reasons for, I mean, like I always tease people, you're a product of your experiences. And you
Yeah.
all have your reasons for why you believe what you're believing, and that's fine. But to your point, putting it in the most respectful manner, I think that can like lessen the intensity
Yeah.
of some conversations. So,
And I think with those iMessages too, you're also like everyone wants to be heard, right?
yeah,
Especially when you're
100%.
upset about something, like you want to be heard. And so hopefully you can say genuinely, like, I
Hmm.
hear you and understand that
Yeah,
that person's frustrated and in pain and like doesn't know how to handle it or manage it, right?
yeah,
And so just saying like, I hear you and I get that, I think could be hopefully we're saying it in a genuine manner, even though it's difficult in that moment, but just letting someone know that they've been heard. And then even if you leave the meeting and you still disagree, if that person feels like you heard them,
yeah,
even though you don't see eye to eye, that can be really powerful for your relationship with that
yeah.
person in the future.
Totally, totally. Okay, so now let's take the angle of support staff. So when we talk about, let's define who we're talking about. So when we talk about support staff, we are talking about all the amazing humans that I call my friends, the strength coaches, athletic performance coaches, athletic trainers of the world that are doing all the behind the scenes work for athletes. And I just always joke and I say I'm like the friend of the athletic trainer, the friend of the strength coach, because y'all do so much. I mean, people have no concept of the amount of work that y'all have to put in. But you are often having to communicate with coaches, sport coaches, you might also be having to communicate with parents, with athletes, etc. So let's talk about from, and I recently read a blog that you wrote on this, talking about support staff, so athletic trainers and strength and conditioning coaches, and their communication with team sport coaches, because there's obviously a lot of times all of you are having to tell a coach about, like, hey, the athlete's injured, the athlete doesn't get to play. Hey, the athlete doesn't get to do this. Or like, I know one of our strength coach friends, she said there's days that, these kids all played in a club tournament over the weekend and now they're at school and the training needs to be less because you're going to burn the kid's body out. And there's so many different things. So talk to me about, like, what you feel are some of the best strategies for communicating with sport coaches from your end. I know you're not an athletic trainer, but you work with them. So from both spaces.
Yeah, so I'll speak to my space first. I communicate with coaches the most often other than hanging out with my athletes.
Yeah, yeah.
I communicate with sport coaches more than with parents, I would say, and really have need of developing those relationships in a deeper manner. And I guess I want to start this by saying, that I think it's really helpful and important to remember that even if you don't see eye to eye with a sport coach on something, we hopefully can always come back to the fact that we're here to serve our athletes. Like, that is our main purpose. That is why high school athletics exist, is to give our kids a great experience that they can enjoy, have fun, talk about for the next 30 years, learn life skills from that will help them in their college years, in their job, all of that. And so I think that is hopefully, again, for most of us, that one thing that we can all agree on no matter what. We can always bring it back to that.
Yeah.
Hey, I know we disagree on this, but we are both trying to do what's best for our athletes. We're both trying to serve our athletes. We both love our athletes. And so I think no matter who the new coach is, hopefully you can at least find that common thread that
Yeah.
links the two of you. Um, and so communication with sport coaches. I've been at my school for a few years now, so if I am developing a new relationship, it's because the coach is new, not me,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
if a new coach comes in, the first thing I'm going to do is reach out to them and congratulate them and tell them welcome to the CA family. And that's because we really mean that. We believe that our school community is a family. And then I'm going to ask to set up a meeting. And it's, like we talked about, face-to-face communication is really important and beneficial. And it's one of the first things that I want to do with a coach is be able to meet and establish as many common threads
Yeah.
together as we can and talk about, for me, why I do what I do, hear from them about why they do what they do. And we want that foundation in place before we have to encounter any of the difficult stuff that's going to come up, or even start to talk about logistics and things.
Yeah.
And so it's congratulations. I would love to meet with you. Can we please meet in person? And of course, it's nice now. Zoom meetings are more popular, right?
Yeah.
Post COVID. So if we need to do a video meeting, I still think seeing that person's face and talking with
Yes.
them is really important. And then, like I said, talking about philosophy, coaching philosophy, and all of that good stuff. And that's the point when I'll let them know what kinds of things their athletes are going to do in the weight room, right?
Yep.
Like, this is what a typical program looks like. And hopefully, we all, as strength coaches, have this. I know why I'm doing everything I'm doing. And
Yes.
being able to explain that why is really important. And so I can
Mhm.
give a why to anything that I do. Um, and then I think at that point, sometimes I just have coaches like, yep, it's all you. Like, I really appreciate that you're here. I'm very glad I don't have to think about this or
Yeah.
do any of this. And sometimes I'll have coaches that say, okay, like, I hear all of that and I would really like to see XYZ, right? And so then we can talk through that. Great. Well,
Yeah.
I'm really glad that you were upfront and honest with me. And I actually love that exercise. I'll make a note that you love it too. And I'll make sure that your athletes learn how to do it the right way, right? Um,
Uh-huh.
and then the last thing I do is strongly, strongly encourage our coaches to be present with their athletes in the weight room. There is a monumental difference in how a team performs in the weight room if their coach head coach or
Oh,
other coaches
good
are
point.
there or if they aren't, it has become black and white, so clear and obvious at
Yeah.
my school. And we would like to think, we have some coaches, well, I set the expectation, they know what it is. I send them in the weight room, they should act the same in there as they do for me. And that sounds like wonderful and
Sounds
great.
so good. Yes.
Right. But it's like the 11th hour of these kids' day and they're exhausted. And the bottom line is that while some of them love training just to train, a lot of them are just training to get better at their sport, right? And so when their sport coach is in there saying, I think this is important enough that I'm spending
Yeah.
my time in this room, it sends the message that they should think it's just as important,
Yeah.
right? And then on top of that, I will tell you the best sport team cultures that we have in our school are the ones where our coaches work out with our athletes.
Oh, that's super cool.
My
Yeah, I've
football
seen a lot
coach,
of that. Yeah.
yeah, he does everything that the kids do, start to finish. In the summer workouts that are, an hour and a half, 2 hours long, start to finish, like he's doing everything. And we have several other coaches that have started to do that. They do everything their athletes do. And even if they don't, I'll tell coaches, you can come in and do your own lift. You can do whatever you want to do, or you can walk around and talk to your athletes
Yeah. Just be
and
there.
tell them, yeah, well, like ask them about their day, and I'm the one that's in charge, and you just get to know them, right?
Yeah.
So there are so many benefits to the coach being in there to develop those relationships with athletes, and then you're also going to get a lot more out of your athletes. So that's kind of how I start with a new coach and how I leave it. Like, please come be a
Yeah.
part of this with them.
Anything on continual communication? Like, do you give your coaches an update like once a week, or do you kind of like we were talking about giving parents an update once a week? I
Yeah.
know sometimes some coaches, to your point, really could care less, but some really do want to be in the know. I mean, I've just seen it
Yeah.
on all angles. And I do think the coaches that are more involved, not necessarily running the show, but, like for me as a dietitian, coaches that really value nutrition. Oh, you watch the players. One of my best examples, and this is college, not high school, but I mean, Jim Schlossnagle, baseball coach. I mean, I was with him at TCU for 10 and a half years. He's immensely successful as a baseball coach in the college space, been to the World Series over and over and over again, et cetera. And when I would do my team talks, he would stand behind me, literally eyeing out every player. Oh,
Yep.
those players are taking notes. They
Yes.
got binders.
Yep.
I mean, I say granola bar. He's like, what kind? And he's like,
Yeah.
tomorrow, everyone
Ingredient
needs
list.
those in their law. And I was like, and guess what? Everyone cared about nutrition.
Yep.
Everyone did nutrition. They asked 1,000 questions. We did one-on-one meetings. They were all prepared and they
Yep.
stinking excelled. And I'm like, it's real. But I think that goes across the board: nutrition, strength and conditioning, all the different things. So I guess my thought would be like, what does that look like on a regular communication basis? And it's going to be different. I get it. If you have a small school, small athletes, some of my poor strength coach friends in Texas probably have like 500 athletes at their school. So that's hard. I get it. But just curious on your thoughts on the continued communication.
Yeah, I do communicate weekly with my coaches.
Yeah.
So we're not super high tech. I just use a Google Sheet for my
Yep.
schedule. And each week has its own tab at the bottom. So pretty
Mhm.
simple that most people have access to. It's nothing fancy. And that sheet is shared with all of our sport coaches. And there's one sheet per season. So we're in winter season right now. Every winter coach and all support staff have access to the winter schedule. And all they have to do is go down to the tab at the bottom to see each week's schedule,
Yeah.
right?
It's great.
And but then also, even though that's a live document and all coaches can go look for that and at that at any time, around Wednesday, so I try to make it Wednesday, and I did that yesterday. I send out just a reminder email. Hey, coaches, next week's schedule is finalized. This is what it looks like. If you could please double check me and let me know if you have any questions or if I've made an
Yep.
error, like that would be great. And for instance, for next week, Monday's MLK Day, right? So
Right.
everyone's schedules are different. Kids are not going to be just already at school and coming to practice. They need to get dropped off and picked up, which
Yep.
makes everything a little bit more complicated. I need to make sure that I have it right, that the coaches know if their athletes are coming before or after practice so that they can tell parents about pickup and drop off times. And
Yeah.
so, um, I'm trying to give them 4 or 5 days, assuming a lot of our coaches send out their weekly emails on Sunday, right? So they have 4 days to check that schedule,
Yeah.
communicate that with their families, and ask me about it and get a reply before they need
Yeah.
to send that email. So I am in communication
Love that.
weekly, and then I also just try to talk to our coaches as
Yeah.
much as I can, right? Whenever they're present around, I go say hi, see how they're doing, ask how their team is
Yeah.
doing, and it's so cool. One of our baseball coaches is my assistant. Could not do what we do without him. He's been with me for 2.5 years at this point, I think. And we have so many coaches that after practice now, we kind of all finish at the same time, around the same time, and they come in and chat, and we end up with this like really cool
Awesome.
coaches hangout in the
I
weight
love
room.
it.
And that's what I want it to be because we're all High School Musical in it
Yeah.
together, right?
Yeah, totally,
um,
totally.
and it's just really amazing to have those kinds of relationships with your coaches.
Sure.
Um,
Well, and
and
they
um,
trust you and you trust them. And that's a
yeah.
huge piece of, I think, the whole equation too.
And I'm blessed that I work with coaches that care as much about why they're doing what they're doing as I
Yeah.
do, right? So
Yeah.
not everyone has
Huge.
that, and I get that, but
Yeah.
that binds us together.
Yeah. Okay. So let's kind of sum up and close out with support staff talking to parents and athletes. So, but I know in some scenarios it's very different. Probably in smaller private schools, you might have more access to talk to them. Many
Yeah.
large public schools, I think every athletic trainer and strength coach is saying hallelujah that they can't talk to parents and
Yeah.
whatever that is. But just kind of give us some takeaways. All of you are very instrumental in an athlete's success, but you also sometimes have to go like that athlete's not ready to go, or a athletic trainer has to make a call on an athlete that's injured, not being able to play that week or whatever it is. And it's not things parents want to hear. Maybe athletes don't want to hear. So just give us some kind of general strategies for support staff talking to parents and how your success, what you do to improve the athlete's success, and then why sometimes they just probably need to trust you.
Yeah. I think again, the reverse of what I asked for from parents earlier is true. We always want to email, right? And like
Yeah.
offer that respect. And then I will always include or CC my athletes and let them
Hmm.
know that they're a part of it too, right? I think our athletic trainers, that's the injury part is tough for me to speak to. I don't
Yeah.
have to have those conversations. I feel
Right.
like it's a really specific kind of conversation.
Hmm.
So that's tough for me to speak to personally, but our athletic trainers do an amazing job of being in communication with parents, not just via email, but they actually do a great job either at the time of injury um, or next game night, right? Even
Yeah.
if the athlete isn't playing, a parent is often present
Yeah.
anyways, right? And they try and take that opportunity to talk to that parent face
That's
to
great.
face.
Hmm.
And so I think for support staff, me and athletic trainers, one of the biggest things is to make sure that we communicate with the parents as often as we can, instead of relying on the athlete to communicate everything the right
Yeah.
way. There could be a very unintentional miscommunication by a 14,
Yeah.
15, 16-year old, right? That's a crucial miscommunication, but was completely accidental. And so I think making sure that we are in direct communication without cutting the athlete out either
Yeah.
is really beneficial and helpful. And then again, I know it's tough at bigger schools, but as much face-to-face communication as
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah. And all the parents out there, trust the athletic trainers,
Yeah.
trust the strength coaches, because you'll all have, there's such reason. I mean, my background is in exercise and sports nutrition. I have a very strong background in exercise physiology. And there's so many reasons why you do the things like it's just so funny because poor, strength coaches will guess, well, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that exercise? Well, shouldn't they be lifting heavier? Well, I thought they need to be stronger. Well, what if they wanted to do that?
That
And
question,
it's
shouldn't they
just
be
like,
lifting heavier?
oh my gosh. I just and it's just kind of like let the strength coach be the strength coach, let the athletic trainer. Y'all are all so in it for the right reasons, and you know what you're doing. The expertise, even at the high school level of athletic trainers and athletic performance and strength coaches, it's unbelievable how much experience all of you have. So just caution, and a lot of times even more than especially newer coaches. All of you have been there a lot longer. And the more you do it, the more you know, right? I mean, I always tell people like, well, how do you know that? And I'm like, well, I just did it for 19 years.
Yes.
I've seen that over and over and over, like different people, same problems. And you learn from that. Experiential learning is huge in sports and understanding that. So, no, I really appreciate all your insights. So, I would say let's sum up with a question. if you're talking to schools, maybe there's athletic directors listening or head coaches out there, what would be like, some of the strategies you might recommend implementing in a school setting for communications? Obviously, I get that there's 1,000 types of trainings that have
Yeah.
to be done, but what would you say is something, an actionable step that a school or even a coach could take in regards to communication in the high school space?
Yeah, this is really difficult to implement things across the board.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, we are a small school, but because all of us work in the middle school and the high school, we have like over 100 coaches, which is pretty
Oh,
wild to think about at a small
a lot.
school. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to implement things across the board. I know one actionable step that's been helpful for our school is to ask all coaches to use the same like method of communication.
Huh.
So email
Yeah.
is always an option, right? But then in addition to email, like we've used, name a couple. I'm not endorsing them; they're just options. We've
Yeah.
used Final Forms. We have used Sports U, and we've used Team Snap.
Yeah. Team
Those are
Snap, Remind. There's like so many different
Yes.
ones.
So
Yeah.
I think, and again, we're very fortunate at our school. Our athletic department is able to provide all coaches whatever you have, whatever type of subscription you have to have, right? Every single one of
Yeah.
our teams gets access to that.
Right.
They don't have to go seek it or find it. It's just provided to them.
Mhm.
And so I know that that's been something that has been helpful. So like you said, kind of organize the communication and also give it its own space so that texting doesn't occur as
Yeah.
often. And it is really easy. Everybody knows how to post on social media, so everybody knows how to post on Sports U, right?
Yes.
To
Yes.
send
Like a
out
good old
those
Facebook group. That's
reminders.
what I
Yeah.
liken it to all the time. I'm like, it's so easy.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think providing that opportunity, but then also requesting weekly communication. Like if there
Yeah.
was one thing that any coach could do to improve the culture of their team and the relationship between them, the athlete, and the parent, if they're not already doing it, it's a weekly email. I just
Yeah.
think it's night and day, or a weekly email or a weekly update on
Yeah.
the app
The
that's
app.
that's
Yeah.
appropriate in length, right? Not two
Right.
bullet points, but like something that's well thought out and talks about the week ahead and celebrates the week behind and
Hmm.
all of that. I think weekly communication is probably the one thing that I would ask for.
Yep, I love that. Well, and it's just like anything, plan in advance. And if you have a set plan in advance, and even though it takes a little bit of time to maybe prep and plan, it should make all the other things go simpler
Yes.
or smoother, or at least the opportunity for those things to be successful. Like I always tell people, you want to exercise regularly, put it on your calendar. You want to eat healthy regularly, prep your snacks on the weekend. Like I'm not asking you to spend 8 hours in the kitchen, but like put some snacks in some baggies so you can take them with
Yes.
you. Same thing, like one email can just really, while it takes a little bit of time, it can go a long ways.
Yes. And
Well, I have loved talking to you, and I didn't ask you this in advance, so we can circle up and put this in the show notes. But any resources that are out there for coaches for, for communications, maybe some of them are like, wow, I'd really love to be a better communicator because we know lots of them haven't maybe been trained in that area. And so I can get that from you unless you have any off the top of your head, because I'm sure that's a kind of an interesting space because it is very different too for different types of sports. So
definitely, yeah, I'll get a couple things to you that coaches can use and look into.
that would be perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a great conversation and I think really insightful, no matter where parents, athletes, coaches, support staff are. Understanding communication and all of us trying to get better at it. I like to pride myself in trying to always get better at communication because we can always do a better job. And ultimately, to your point, that's going to improve the success of the athlete and ultimately the athlete's experience playing for a coach and a team, et cetera. So thank you so much for being on today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to talk about all of this and try to help make any athlete's experience better is a win.
Awesome. Thank you.